Welcome back to the DCM Pod. Today, I am joined with a very special guest. He is none other than Jeff Standridge. Jeff, we're really excited to have you here today. Jeff is an entrepreneur, he's an educator, and he is an author. He has been spending decades building companies, mentoring leaders, and investing in innovation across Arkansas and beyond. His newest book explores tensions between resilience and humility, drive and empathy, strength and compassion. So today, we are diving into what it really means to lead and live with both grit and grace. He wrote a book that is available everywhere books are sold. And so a QR code is going to pop up on the screen throughout this episode that you can scan to figure out if you lean more towards grit or towards grace. So with all of that out of the way, Jeff, welcome today. We're so excited to have you here.
Man, it's great to be here, Tim. I appreciate you for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we're just going to jump right on into a few icebreakers, if that's okay.
You bet.
Yeah, just to get to know you a little bit more. So if you weren't building companies and mentoring founders, what completely different career would you secretly love to try?
You know, I think I would love to be a wealth advisor, financial advisor.
Yeah.
I actually thought I wanted to do that early in my college career. I actually, when I went to college, when I came to UCA, I had an uncle who was a banker, and he told me to go up there and get a finance degree, and he would teach me how to be a banker. And I took Intro to Finance and Economics my freshman year without actually declaring a major, and I made the only D I've ever made in my life, which is interesting because now I have a venture fund and I teach entrepreneurial finance at UCA.
Right.
So I had the underlying talent. I just wasn't prepared academically. So I think I'd want to be a wealth advisor.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. Why did that remind me of Michael Jordan getting cut for his like 8th grade basketball team? That story of like didn't have the talent at the time and now you do. It's just like,
yeah, you could compare me to Michael Jordan all you want to. That'd be great.
that'd be
I'll take
the
that
best comparison you'd ever want. Yeah. Second question. What's the most entrepreneur thing about you that drives your family nuts and drives them crazy?
Okay, I've probably two of them.
Okay.
One, every decision turns into a miniature strategy session or a mini board meeting. You know, it's like, hey, where do y'all want to go eat? Or somebody say, Dad, where do you want to go eat? Or Jeff, where do you want to go eat? And my response is, well, let's think about what our objectives are. Are our objectives to optimize for convenience, for price, or for client experience, you know, dining experience? And they're like, just where do you want to go eat? Or calculating and monetizing everything, right? Everything is a monetization discussion. It's like, you know what? I bet they could do a lot better in this restaurant if they knew what their plate costs were, or if I bet they don't even know what their gross margin is. You know, if they fix their pricing, they could probably do double whatever they're doing today. So,
and the whole time they're like, well, we just want to know what you wanted for an appetizer.
Exactly. Yeah. So those are probably the two things that drive my family insane.
That's absolutely hilarious. Paul, anything else to add on to that, or are you just ready to jump into questions? Up to you.
I don't know. You're good. That was funny. I was chuckling at that because I have thoughts like that sometimes when I'm out eating. And
yeah. It's also calculating the cost per hour of everything, right?
Yeah,
so it's not just about restaurants. It's like, I could do that and it would be so-and-so and I would be making $3 an hour, or I could just pay somebody to do it.
Always analyzing it through that lens. That's hilarious. Yeah. All right. Now let's just jump right into these questions if that works for y'all. Is that
Works
good?
for me.
All right. Number one, you have had a long career as an entrepreneur, mentor, and leader. So for those who may or may not know your full story, what experiences most shaped your leadership philosophy?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I am retired military. So I spent 20 years in the Army National Guard. So I would say that that had to have a significant influence. Right after I graduated college, I bought the gas station muffler shop that I had worked at all through high school, even up through my freshman year in college. And so when I graduated college, I purchased that gas station and lost my shirt. And so that had to have had some significant influences on me. And then the number of leaders that I've worked with over the years, I was formerly trained as a paramedic and a respiratory therapist and was a professor at the medical school at UAMS. in the respiratory therapy program, 9 years on the helicopter team at Arkansas Children's Hospital. So when I went into business, I didn't have a lot of business. I had zero business experience other than the gas station muffler shop. So being mentored by, when they didn't really even maybe know they were mentoring me, the number of leaders with whom I worked and them pouring into me and giving me feedback, coupled with my academic studies in leadership, all of those things kind of meshed together to create experiences that I couldn't have gotten any other way.
Multiple different milestones that just eventually added up
sure.
and built you up to where you are now. Yeah.
Making a lot of mistakes, a lot of leadership mistakes.
Yep.
I started, probably 25 years ago with what I called the Standridge Top 10, which was the leadership lessons I learned the hard way. And then it became the Standridge Dozen. Then it became the Standridge Baker's Dozen, then the Standridge Top 15, Standridge Top 20. I think it's the Standridge Top 25 now, and I've got about 35 lessons on the list. So continuing to make leadership lessons,
right?
Learn leadership lessons.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think maybe it's a form of encouragement to know, maybe it's through the humility that you're showing, that no matter what stage, there is going to be those random mistakes that just happen, but thankfully we learn from them and then move on forward through
Absolutely.
that.
We all make mistakes, still make them every single day.
Yep. So, well, now, what were you going to say, Paul?
Like, it was cool whenever I was listening to your book and to hear kind of the timeline of your life. And, sometimes, especially if you're in your 20s, it's like, oh my gosh, why am I not, a multimillionaire and doing all these things? And it's like, okay, well, you spent 9 years, being a helicopter pilot with Arkansas Children's and doing all these different, you've bought businesses and failed, and it's just the growing pains of life. And that was such a cool theme to kind of hear throughout your book, to hear the different stories of the journey of life and making your way through it. And a lot of it is failure, but then picking yourself back up and keep on going.
Yeah, and I appreciate you for casting it in that light. My wife would say he's still trying to figure out what he wants to be when he grows up, I think. And so, no, I have reinvented myself several times, not really out of necessity, but almost out of desire. The last reinvention happened 9 years ago, coming up on 10 years ago, when I left the business career where I'd spent the vast majority of my career at Axiom, and started the Conductor and Innovation Junkie and the work that I do now. And that was on my 50th birthday. So I went out on my own, walked away from a very gainfully employed position as an executive, and took the risk and went out on my own at literally on my 50th birthday. So that reinvention has happened. Lori tells the story of when I chose to leave UAMS to go to the corporate world, to go to Axiom. She would walk into my home office, and I would be in there with the light turned off in my chair, just staring off out into space, where I was contemplating, do I walk away from the only thing I've ever known to go do this? And so, those things have happened probably 3 or 4 times over my career.
I mean, I've heard this so many times. Behind every successful man, there is a very encouraging and very supportive wife. So it sounds like you're able to do all these things because of the supportive wife that you have.
Completely.
Yeah. So now to tie in the book a little bit, was there a season or a time where you would say that it kind of forced you to develop a little bit of grit through all that you've mentioned, all those different seasons, the different reinventions, those different jobs and marketplaces you were in? Was there a time where it kind of forced you to have a little bit of grit?
Yeah, I would say several different things that I can point to. One was that first semester in college where I made that first D, that only D I've ever made. Well, the rest of the grades weren't A's, I'll tell you that. So I decided, nope, I'm probably not going to be a finance major. Well, I went to college on a music scholarship. And so I decided, well, maybe I'm supposed to be a music major. So I switched over to be a music major until they realized that I wasn't particularly talented. I just worked hard on one instrument, but all the other music majors could play multiple instruments. And so, nope, not going to be a music major. And so then I ended up working full time, and, I really wasn't prepared to go to college at all. I graduated high school in a very rural school district, graduated with 28 people. So when I came to UCA, I'd never been in a town with that many people, much less classes with that many people. And so I crammed a 4-year degree into 6 years. That took a little joke for you there. That took some grit to just get through that, just pure determination. Then the losing of that first business that I bought. And so several things along the way, I think, have been the formation of the grit, the military experience, et cetera. Right. You get off of a bus or a cattle car is really what it is. And the very first day of basic training, and there are 30 of you standing there at attention, and there are about 2 drill sergeants for every person standing there, circulating around like bees, yelling at you. Requires a little bit of grit, right? So I'd say several milestones along the way.
Gotcha. What about grace?
Grace has been a little harder for me. Grit comes much more naturally. My back to my encouraging and supporting wife, which she very much is, still wonders where I got the content to write about grace or about emotional intelligence. A lot. So I spent a number of years as a young doctoral student at UAMS studying the differences between high performers in healthcare and average performers. That was the basis of my doctoral work. Then ended up going to Axiom and conducting the same research, but this time for computer engineers, software engineers, systems administrators, database administrators, and what have you. And much of that work was steeped in prior research that was done around emotional intelligence, or the grace side of the equation. So cognitively, I knew a lot of that stuff, but behaviorally, I wasn't really good at demonstrating it. And as I continued to study and observe and watch successful people, both from an academic perspective, but also from an observational perspective, it was convicting for me. So I had to start figuring out how to demonstrate some of those emotional intelligence skills. I still, on the empathy scale, that's probably the biggest thing I have trouble with. I can write about it because I know it's important. I can demonstrate it in certain instances, but when my back is against the wall, it's probably the one I have to dig deepest to find.
All right. Well, then we'll move right on to the next one. Before we get into the book itself, we've already talked about grit and grace, and you've talked about grace being that emotional intelligence. How would you define, in your own words, grit and grace?
So the synonyms I use for grit are mental toughness, mental resilience. Angela Duckworth calls it the intersection of passion and perseverance. So it is the ability to bounce back after facing adversarial conditions, significant obstacles, or what have you, and to bounce back, recover, and still stay focused on the end result or the objectives at hand. That's the best way I can describe grit.
Okay.
Grace, on the other hand, is the ability to recognize and manage and control your own emotions, and even manage sometimes the emotions of others, in order to keep a situation calm, in order to make thoughtful, logical decisions, in order to produce the best outcome. And so there are some overlaps between grit and grace, predominantly the whole emotional regulation side. The differences is for grit, the emotional regulation is really pointed toward stemming your emotions so that you can continue to fulfill the mission. Think about a Navy SEAL in live fire. Right. There's every reason to be fearful and to let your emotions run wild, but being able to curb those emotions so that you can fulfill the mission. On the emotional intelligence side, emotional regulation is a big part of it, but it's less about fulfilling the mission in hand. It's more about maintaining the relationships as a result of gaining or maintaining your composure in a tense situation so that we don't damage relationships. Right. That's how I would differentiate the two.
Right. And maybe it's just me, but I've seen a lot of times where I've maybe it's predominantly more in men where they're like, no, push all the grace down. It's all about grit. It's all about getting after it. Whoever you step over, as long as you get to the goal that you need. And so I guess it kind of leads into a follow-up I was thinking about. So grit and grace, it's from what it sounds like they have to coexist. That's kind of where we're going. Why is it that they should more coexist rather than stand apart from each other?
Great question. So as a result of all of my research, and for probably 20 years following that research, I talked about results in relationships. That my research, coupled with the research of other researchers, uncovered the fact that to be optimally successful for sustained periods of time, one has to walk the tightrope between results and relationships. The delivery of consistent results and the drive for sustainable relationships. And that was the way I described them both. And I even used a set of scales. And I said, if we focus on results at the expense of relationships, we'll be wildly successful very, very quickly. That is until we alienate everyone around us who's responsible for helping us maintain those results. Then we lose them both. If we focus on relationships at the expense of results, people will love us for quite a while until they lose respect for us because we can't deliver results consistently, and then we lose them both. And it wasn't until just recently, I started in the last several years, that I started using the terms grit and grace versus results in relationships. And it's because most of the authors out there were writing about one or the other. Daniel Goleman, Travis Bradberry have been writing about emotional intelligence for decades, but just emotional intelligence. Right. Angela Duckworth has been studying and writing about grit since the mid-2000s, 2012, 2008, 2015, somewhere around in there. But she's not talking about emotional intelligence. She's talking about grit or mental toughness. Daniel Goleman and Travis Bradberry are talking about emotional intelligence. And my experience and my research suggests that it requires both. So that's actually the reason I wrote the book, Grit and Grace.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, it's such the dichotomy of the two. It just goes back to, yin and yang, and you have to have the combination of the two. You can't be outweighted in one direction. And like you said, if you have too much grit, you'll get a lot done, but you make everyone else mad in the process, and too much grace and you don't get anything done.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Yeah, you have to manage that.
I like to talk about the analogy of the accelerator and the steering wheel, because it's actually neuroscience. It's not just behavioral. It's actually the neuroscience that's going on in our brain. And we know from that neuroscience research that both emotional intelligence or grace and grit can be trained. Interventions have produced better results. But if you think about, you've got these sections in your brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is the executive function part of your brain, and the amygdala, which is the danger center, the emotional center of your brain. I like to think of the amygdala as the accelerator and the prefrontal cortex as the steering wheel and the brakes. So if the amygdala gets activated by a stressful situation, a fearful situation, something going on, the heart rate goes up, the respiratory rate shortens, and our focus narrows on the mission at hand. The accelerator gets punched, right? But it's not necessarily the enemy, because without that accelerator, we wouldn't have the sense of urgency. We wouldn't have the additional effort, the additional focus to get where we want to get. But an uncontrolled accelerator generally results in a crash. Mm-hmm. So the prefrontal cortex part of the brain, if there is connection and integration between the two, it takes over and it tempers the accelerator a little bit by tapping the brakes, maybe leaning on the brakes a little bit, and then using the steering wheel to counteract obstacles, to hug the curves a little more tightly, to control the direction of the vehicle so that it doesn't result in a crash. And so grit and grace, neuroscience-wise, is really the integration between that executive function part of the brain and the emotional center of our brain.
Right. And
so it demonstrates itself behaviorally, but there's something very, very neurological going on in the process.
Right. So it's not they can coexist, they have to coexist.
They really have to coexist. And the training of the brain to those two parts of the brain to integrate with one another is the actual development of grit and grace.
Well, that kind of leads right into the third question. And that question is, what kind of prompted you? You've mentioned it, your wife making the joke of like, where's all this grace information coming from? And you said you can write about it. So what kind of prompted you at where you're at in your stage of your career and of your life? What prompted you to write this book, Grit and Grace?
Yeah, another funny story, if I can diverge for a moment. When I was in my doctoral studies, I came home one day and I told my wife, I think I'm going to be about 9 hours away from sitting for the licensed professional counselor exam. I think I'm going to go ahead and take those 9 hours and then go ahead and get that credential, go ahead and become a licensed counselor. And she said, "Oh, no, you're not." She probably even had a choice word or two. Mm-hmm. "Oh, blankety blank, you're not." No, I'm kidding. She doesn't talk that way. But anyway, she said, "No, you're not going to do it." I said, "Why?" She said, "You have no empathy. You'll be sitting with a client and saying, we've talked about this for 3 weeks. Why don't you go out and do something different? And so she encouraged me not to go that route, which I didn't, obviously. And so fast forward, I was being trained as a Berkman consultant, one of the personality typing inventories, kind of like the DISC and the Myers-Briggs and the others that are out there. And I was actually training with Dr. Berkman in Houston at his headquarters. And when I took the Berkman exam, one of the components that it measures was empathy. And it was on a scale of 1 to 99, and I scored a 6. Oh my gosh. And when I told my wife, she says, "Oh, I'm so proud of you. Congratulations. I didn't think you had any." So back to the question.
So thankful you're not going to be a counselor.
You're not so thankful. See, I told you.
Yeah.
So as I step back over, I did my doctoral research 25 years ago, 26 years ago, 27 years ago, something like that. And I'd been talking about results in relationships for so long. And I had come across, of course, Angela Duckworth's work in 2016, 2017, continuing to speak and teach and consult on leadership and organizational transformation around the world, as I've done over the years. And I started looking at this concept of people writing about one or the other, emotional intelligence or mental toughness, grit or grace. And I said, I've been talking about a lot of this for a long time. Maybe it's time to take all of that and put it together into a single resource that people can utilize, and that's what led to the creation.
Very nice. Was there something that you were maybe also seeing in young leaders or founders that made you feel like this message, like if there's any time that this message is needed, it's needed right now? Those who are up and coming and starting businesses, or they're young leaders in general.
Well, it's interesting. Yes. But I started observing it in healthcare. I consult with a number of healthcare clients. I serve on the board of a local health system. And both of my daughters are nurses. My wife is a nurse practitioner. My son-in-law is a physician. And so through COVID, there were very, very few frontline patient care providers that actually dealt directly with hospitalized COVID patients. There were some, but it was a very small portion of the total healthcare workforce. And since that time, up until probably 2025, so from 2020 to 2024, mid-25, somewhere around in there, inpatient volumes, acute care inpatient volumes have been down. So workload has been down from a patient volume perspective. And very few people actually touched a COVID patient during the pandemic in an acute care setting. Yet the rates of workload stress and burnout complaints from within the healthcare environment are at an all-time high. Some research came out a couple of years ago that suggests that by 2030, 1/5 of the nursing workforce is going to leave the profession. Mm. That's 1 million nurses.
Yeah.
That some other research said that over the next decade, the number of nurses being produced is going to grow 6% over a 10-year period of time, which is about 175,000 nurses. Yet when you factor in retirements, departures, attrition, and all those things, we're going to have 199,000 open positions, or 193,000 open positions every year during that decade.
Wow.
So that was one thing. Well, then I started looking at that research in the non-healthcare areas, and it's very, very similar. 80%, 70 to 80% of workers express that they have staffing issues, workload issues, stress issues, burnout issues, that they become disengaged. Disengaged employees is one of the single greatest hidden costs to companies. And so all of those things together started leading me down the path of this concept of grit and grace, this concept of emotional regulation with mental toughness and being able to bounce back from stressful scenarios. Research along with that saying that most people, 60 to 70%, when they face moderate degrees of stress or stressful incidents, generally have a resilience trajectory We tend to trend, if you will, toward resilience. But right now, something's affecting that, and so I don't know if it's the environment or what it is. So that was another factor that observationally that led me to start digging into that some more.
Do you think that like during COVID, I mean, when we were isolated, it required almost a lot more grit and introspection because we weren't around people as much, and I think you lose a lot of the community when you go into the office. It a lot of times is a lot easier to go into the office and be around people. We're all in the same space doing the same things, working hard, but then you go home and you have to have a lot more grit and discipline to actually sit down and do the work. And I think COVID challenged a lot of people where they had to look at themselves and be like, okay, I have to wake up. No one else is looking at me, telling me what to do outside of a computer. And you have to wake up every day and keep at it and keep that. And that required a little bit more grit. But on the flip side of that, you lose a little bit of that grace and the community of life, and people are very social and want to be around other people. And I think that challenged a lot of people. And I think we see that in the workforce. I think the world is still recovering from that a little bit.
I think you're right. I have said before that the long tail of the pandemic was less about the health effects and more about the human dynamics, the business effects, and what have you. I mean, I think it's no surprise that I say this is the degree of civility in the world is drastically different than it was 2018, 2019. I'm not saying that it's directly causational or that there's a causation as a result of the pandemic, but there's definitely correlation. And so, you look at social media, you look at people's the lack of civility for people who are in toward people who are in public office. It's crazy right now the way that has changed, and I don't know what is driving that exactly, but another reason for this, this need for understanding of the balance between grit and grace.
Mm-hmm. So for this fourth question, many people pride themselves on having more grit. Many people pride themselves on having more grace because maybe if they're pride themselves more on grit, I kind of mentioned it earlier, they kind of look at grace almost as like a weakness. So how do you challenge that mindset?
Well, by the way, we all lean toward one or the other. Very, very seldom do you find people who are naturally well balanced between the two. Mm-hmm. So we all have that tendency one way or the other. But challenging people who really want to grow. One thing about grit is grit. One of the foundational elements of grit is having a growth mindset, recognizing that I'm not all that and that I haven't arrived, mm-hmm. but that there's constantly things that I can learn. I'm not a fixed being. I'm malleable, I'm pliable, and I can be molded over time. And so one of the ways that I challenge that is communicate the stats around, the fact that emotional intelligence predicts performance, but grit also predicts performance. Together, they predict even greater performance. And then letting them do an assessment to assess where they tend to fall one way or the other. Are they more grit or are they more grace? And, they say that awareness is the first stage of development, is creating that awareness in people that they're not on the balance usually. They're somewhere in between.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. There's like an inward and outward aspect to each of grit and grace, where it's like you look at grit and you have to look at it inward. That's kind of more the discipline, but also the outward grit of going out into the world and making things happen.
Yeah.
And then for, grace, you have to have empathy. That's the outward version of grace, but then also inward and just self-awareness and being able to
regulate your emotions.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think about grit, you've got this passion. It starts with being passionate about something, and that then fuels a discipline to bring that about which we're passionate to fruition.
Right.
That leads to courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is taking action despite being fearful, despite being afraid. And then that leads to the persistence of being able to bounce back, or the persistence to be able to keep going, and the resilience of being able to bounce back.
Right.
So all of those kind of go together. If you take a look at on the emotional intelligence side, it starts with that self-awareness, Paul, that you said, being aware of my emotions and being able to read the room in terms of other people's emotions, being able to regulate those emotions, but also being intrinsically motivated, having some social skills and empathy to go along with that as well, and integrity.
Right.
Being willing to match my words with my deeds.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen anybody, a leader of some sort, fail because they only favored one and were almost absent of the other? Have you ever seen that occur? It's okay if you don't have anything off the top of your head. It's like,
me.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
No,
okay. Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
Me, pick me.
Yeah.
There are instances, and fortunately I had leaders who would put a mirror up in front of me. One particular leader, she would say, hey, how'd you think that meeting went today? I said, I thought it went great. She said, what did you think about your interaction with Bob? Well, Bob needs to get on board. Bob needs to get with the program. Well, Bob is senior to you. You know that, right? And, Bob has the ability to influence your career. You realize that, right? Bob actually leads a lot of people in this organization, and he's responsible for X amount of revenue in the organization. He's a significant leader. You think you might have damaged that relationship a little bit? And so it would kind of put that mirror up in front of me and help me realize that I was just not very emotionally intelligent and not very graceful. And then help me realize that I probably needed to circle back around and have a conversation with Bob, maybe make some amends, rebuild the bridge, offer an apology if I needed to, or what have you.
I kind of noticed that in the writing of this book. So I listened to it on Audible,
okay.
And I thought it was interesting that you had many success stories from all these other people, but most of the failures that we heard about were from you.
And I had a very recent failure that I wrote about in the book as well, where I violated every principle that I have taught around leadership and grit and grace over the last 25 years. I violated every one of those because I lost my ever-loving mind with somebody who was a friend. And we had an agreement on a certain situation. I felt like that agreement wasn't honored. When I called the person, something was said that kind of set me off, I guess. I don't know. And I lost my mind. My wife even said to me, in the 30 years that we've been married, I've never seen you blow your stacks like that. And it was humiliating. It was embarrassing. In the moment, it wasn't. I was right.
Right.
I was right, and I was going to make sure that this person knew I was right. And then my wife said that to me after I hung up the phone, and it kind of just registered with me. Then I went to bed, woke up at 2:00 in the morning, happened to be on a Saturday night, got up the next morning to get ready to go to church of all places, and just completely convicted and remorseful of what had happened, sick to my stomach. Granted, I was still right, but I had given up the high ground to be right because of my behavior. What was right or wrong was completely lost. And so finally that afternoon or that early evening, I called the person back and I said, we need to talk about what transpired this weekend at a totally separate time,
right?
Because I've given up the high ground to be right, or the moral ground to be right here. Let's talk about that at a separate time. Right now, I just need to apologize to you. And his response to me was, I will never deny forgiveness to someone who comes to me and authentically asks for it. So his modicum of grace in that moment totally overcame my complete and total absence of it the day before.
That's huge. Yeah. Before we take a little break, I was going to mention the comment of how this relationship between grit and grace, what I've noticed is sometimes, especially my wife, who is a very graceful person, I feel like I favor a little bit more towards grit. In those days where I am low on the grit scale and I feel maybe a little burned out, or I feel like her grace almost, whether I'm 25% grit today, it's almost like she levels me out with that 75% grace, and it just kind of brings me back up and grit. So it's kind of interesting, that relationship, to help again, prove that idea that they cannot be separate. They have to go in tandem. And I don't know if that correlates in any way, but it's almost like her, or the days where she is low on grace and she is exhausted and she's feels like she puts herself out there and people have hurt her. It's almost like that grit that I have that I could probably help maybe boost the grit that she's got, or the grace that she's got. So that relationship that works in tandem.
I've said before, my wife is total opposite of me. She is very much grace. I'm very much grit. When you look at personality inventories, if you plot them on a four quadrant grid, I'm going to be upper right hand corner and she's going to be lower left hand corner, or me upper left and her lower right. So we're diagonal opposites in every instance. And I've said that when we are at our best, we operate like a Singer sewing machine. We're fabulous when we're at our best.
Right.
When we're just slightly below our best, not even when we're at our worst, if we get slightly below our best, we throw a rod or something. I mean, it's everywhere, and so we have to work at the relationship harder. But when we work at the relationship to be as close to our best as we can be, we are a great couple together. But it requires, she's more grace, I'm more grit, and we have to figure out how to come to the middle for each other.
Yep, that's right. All right. Before we dive back into any more questions, here is a word from our sponsor, Innovation Junkie. If you're leading a larger company and you're looking to bring innovation into the heart of your business, Innovation Junkie is here to help. They specialize in strategic planning and driving innovation for established organizations, helping them stay competitive and future focused. So, whether you're looking to improve processes, scale effectively, or foster a culture of innovation, Innovation Junkie has the expertise to guide your team. Check them out and discover how they can help you unlock new possibilities within your company. All right, now that we're back, here's the next question. How does grit and grace show up differently in entrepreneurship versus corporate leadership versus mentoring?
I don't know that there are drastic differences in how they show up across the various domains that you described. In the entrepreneurship world, you begin to see grit show up because of the tremendous amount of work that is required to get a company off the ground.
Right.
By the same token, if I'm all grit, even in that entrepreneurship world where I have to have elevated levels of grit, if I'm all grit, then I'm going to have a hard time recruiting and retaining a team to help me keep that business going. And so that's how I would describe the way it begins to show up there. The emotional regulation part of emotional intelligence, or of the grace element, shows up when the stress is on, and I'm not certain that I'm going to be able to make payroll of how I actually handle myself, how I actually keep those emotions at bay and actually move forward toward a solution. Maybe if I'm an engineer and I've got to go stand up in front of a group of potential investors and sell them on why they should invest in my business, clearly I'm going to have a degree of emotional intelligence there, or grace, to be able to handle the questions that they're going to ask, so that I come off as authentic and not a charlatan, so to speak. So that's how I would describe kind of some differences of where it may show up in entrepreneurship. The other one, I know mentoring was the third one. What was the second one?
Corporate leadership.
In corporate leadership is much more prone to organizational politics than an entrepreneurial endeavor. And so being able to persist with grit through the decision-making process that has to happen in order to actually get something done in a large organization, or to be able to navigate emotionally the organizational politics that happen between various departments and functions and leaders and executives, particularly when people are jockeying for position within those growing companies. You begin to see different manifestations of how it shows up there. On the mentoring side, there's a balance of being able to give someone very direct feedback, which is often more of a grit kind of thing, and being able to read when maybe we're being a little too tough. I have a phrase that I use now that I've begun to use more and more, and that is from a leadership perspective, and that is clarity is kindness. Clarity is kindness. When I give you direct feedback about your performance or about your lack of performance, and I lay out the expectations for you and what is required in order to fulfill those expectations, that can be perceived many times as harsh and not very kind. But if it means the difference between your success and failure, then it is the epitome of kindness.
Right.
Ambiguity is not very kind. When I am ambiguous about what I expect of you, when I am ambiguous with regard to what is required for you to be successful in this company, in this job, in this role, or what have you, I am being many things other than kind.
Right. I guess you kind of answered it. Are there any other maybe possible common mistakes leaders might make, especially within those realms when you're trying to apply these principles? You've listed a few. One, for example, with the corporate side of things, it being politics and trying to navigate those politics. Are there any other possible common mistakes in those particular realms when they try to apply these principles at all?
I have to think about that one a moment.
Okay. Not that it's not satisfying what you said. It's just like almost expanding of like, because those are also three big areas. Those are three big things that have their own certain different complications. And I know that you mentioned earlier about when you're an engineer, you have to present in a certain way to investors, and you're having to be very aware. And I didn't know if there was maybe other common mistakes that people don't look out for.
Well, I don't know if I would say a common mistake, but I will tell you environments. There are different environments where people might think that these two concepts are not relevant.
Right.
I just came from a lunch with my pastor today, and we were talking. Much of that conversation was based on leadership. Leadership is required in religious organizations, in faith-based organizations, and the element of grit and the element of grace are very much as significant and as important and as necessary in those types of organizations as they are in for-profit organizations. You know, I often get when I kind of bring my business perspective to a nonprofit board or to a religious organization, a faith-based organization, I often get, well, we can't run this like a business. Well, actually you can with certain adaptations, of course. I do work with higher education institutions, public school districts. And while you can't run it precisely like a for-profit business, there are things about a for-profit business that we would do well to remember, even in the running of our church, our school district, our institution of higher education, or our faith-based nonprofit.
Right.
Yeah, I run into that on film sets. So like when we film, say we're filming a short film, and we spend 6 months planning for this short film, and we have to film everything in a span of 48 hours or a weekend. And me as the director, it's like as soon as set starts, my amygdala is just at full throttle, and everything is just hyper focused on, we have to get this done, and we have 15 minutes to get this shot, and we're in this location for 90 minutes. And I had to learn a little bit of grace in this process of people who are just like, hey, like, I know that you want to get all this stuff done, but like, no one wants to be on the set if you're a jerk about it. Like, it's not everyone is in the same mindset of you that nothing else matters besides the shot. And realizing that you lose your crew and your people if you don't, settle and take a step back and take some direction and feedback and input from other people. And it's not always going to be done exactly the way that you want. But that's that incorporating that grace into that grit of trying to get it done.
Yeah. I don't remember who said it, or if I said it. But someone once said that if you think you're leading, take a look behind you. If no one's following, then maybe you're just out taking a walk.
Oh, that's really good.
And so, yeah, if you think about that, right? I may think I'm leading in that shot, in that a setting where I'm actually shooting a 48-hour short film. But if people aren't following, then maybe I'm not leading. Maybe I'm just barking orders.
Right.
Yeah. And I think I saw it as like, well, I'm going to set the example, right? I'm going to work really hard, and everyone else then is going to see that and also going to work really hard and like match my energy. It doesn't work like that.
Well, and let's be clear, right? There's also a time and place for everything, right? What I like to call situational leadership. If this room were to break out into a fire right now, I'm probably not going to say, show of hands. Paul, what do you think we should do? Tim, what do you think we should do, right? I'm going to start barking orders. I'm going to start, I'm not going to be worried about your feelings. I'm not going to be worried about your emotions or trying to regulate my emotions. I'm going to tell you to call 911. I'm going to tell you to tend to the injured, and I'm going to say, get out of the room, and I'm going to follow along behind you to make sure everybody's out. I'm going to be very, very gritty,
right?
Because the loss of life is more important than the degree to which I protect your feelings,
right.
or your emotions, or recognize your emotions. Right? I'm not going to be very self-aware, and that's okay. But not every setting is an emergency like that.
Right.
And so being able to know when one might need to carry the day versus when the other, that's back to that regulation. So, even the Navy SEALs and the Special Forces operators across all of the military, while we tend to think of them as just grit only, that's not the case. They actually want to know the person standing beside them or lying beside them in a foxhole is going to be someone they can depend upon emotionally, integrity-wise, trust-based, et cetera, all of the above. So they put as much effort on the cultivation of emotional intelligence as they do the cultivation of courage and grit and discipline and what have you. Right. Both of them are vitally important, even in our special force operations across all of our military.
Absolutely. And leading right into our next question, we live in a culture that celebrates fast wins and viral successes. And so how does grit and grace speak into a generation that wants results quickly?
Well, I believe the way it speaks into that generation is that those results that you get very, very quickly aren't going to be worth anything if you cannot maintain them.
Right.
And so it's okay to want results very, very quickly. But we have to also figure out how to maintain those results. And we can only do that by building a broad base of relationships and maintaining a broad base of relationships. Right. So, you can either move slow and in the end go fast, or move fast and in the end probably go a lot slower. Right. And I've said that before. With people, slow is fast and fast is slow. So if I focus on the results and I don't also equally so focus on the people, I'll get the short-term results very, very quickly, but I will give up the long-term results in exchange. By the same token, if I focus on just the long-term results and not the short-term results as well, I may not get the opportunity to enjoy the long-term results because my organization fails in the short term.
Right.
So it is a combination of the two. And if someone who is results-oriented, they need to keep both time horizons in their focus.
That reminds me of a saying where it's, if you want to go far, go alone. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, bring people with you.
That's right.
And slow down.
That's exactly right.
And I definitely think you hit the nail on the head. And that's exactly what that reminded me of is, you want to get fast results, then yeah, fine. But you're probably, again, look back, there's probably going to be no one there with you. You've left them all in the dust. But if you want to go far and you want to be successful and you want to maintain that success, sometimes it means slowing down and bringing people alongside with you. For sure. That's really good.
And the delayed gratification of working at something and working at a project. And, so I used to detail cars, and I always really enjoyed that job because we would get a car in the morning and I would get to work on it throughout the day. And then by the end of the day, it was done. And it was really rewarding. And I learned about how it's like, okay, the enjoyment of being results oriented. But then versus going back to like a short film, you're working on something for 8, 9, 10, 12 months. And it's like the delayed gratification of keeping working at it. And it's hard in those moments when you're working on a project that has such an extended horizon.
Right.
It takes grit to have the perseverance and the discipline to keep at it. And it's easy 3 months in to kind of lose sight of why you started it. The excitement isn't there as much. The passion has died down. You kind of have to find ways to stay focused and stay fired up about what you're trying to accomplish. And I think setting goals is a big part of that, and recognizing what you're trying to accomplish and what you set out to do, and to see that goal through. And I think that going back to your question, Tim, like that's something that I think a lot of people, I don't want to say a lot of people struggle with now. I think that's something that people have struggled with forever. And that's just a struggle of the human condition.
Well, I will tell you that the single most undertaught subject in any setting is the subject of goal setting, action planning, and progress monitoring.
Right.
It's just not taught. I've taught seventh grade Sunday school. By the way, that's not my gift, but I did twice when my daughters were in the seventh grade. I've taught at the collegiate level. I've taught in the workforce level, working adults, and the subject of goal setting, action planning, and progress monitoring is just something that's really never touched on. And it is one of the best ways to develop long-term grit, is to teach people to delay gratification and to put regular progress milestones, set long-term goals, and put regular progress milestones in place and track their effort against those. Is a great way to develop grit.
Yeah. Is your favorite way to set goals is the SMART framework? Is that usually how you go into setting them?
Yeah, it is.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Explain the what SMART that framework, is. And there are a couple of different iterations of the SMART framework. The one that I use is specific, measurable, agreeable, relevant, and time bound. And some people will say attainable. Well, you should never set a goal that's not attainable. So to me, that is a little bit redundant.
Dream big, Jeff. Come on.
Now I set goals that are stretch goals, but I never set one that I know I'm not going to complete. Mm-hmm. I set ones that will stretch me to every inch of my being, right? But so specific, that it is a very specific goal. It is measurable. In fact, I will know without a doubt that I've in fact achieved it once it's done. It is agreeable, meaning that is agreeable with the other goals that I set. I should never set a goal that the accomplishment of it would prevent the accomplishment of one of the other goals I've set. Mm-hmm. So that's what I mean by agreeable. Mm-hmm. Relevant to what I'm trying to accomplish, and then time bound. Mm-hmm. And so that's the SMART definition that I use, and I try to apply those to all of the goals that I set. I also am a very strong proponent of casting a vision and understanding kind of your why. That's another, by the way, that is one of the elements of both grit and grace, having a future orientation and connecting emotionally to the why behind that future orientation. And the story that I tell in the book is about, I went to respiratory therapy school because I wanted to be a respiratory therapist on the helicopter team at Arkansas Children's Hospital. I was working my way through college as an EMT here at Conway Regional Hospital, and we would actually go to the roof, and we would bring the helicopter teams down, take them to wherever they needed to go to help the patients, and then help them get back loaded and off. And I said, I want to go do that. So I went to respiratory therapy school because I wanted to fly on the helicopter team. Not because I was particularly passionate about being a respiratory therapist. I wanted to do that job. So the day that I enrolled in respiratory therapy school, I went to UAMS and I went to Children's Hospital, and I applied for a job as a respiratory technician. UAMS offered me a job on the spot because I had 4 years as an EMT and a paramedic. And I said, well, I'm applying at Children's. Give me a couple of hours. Went to Children's. They didn't offer me a job. And so I went to work at UAMS. That was in June. By the way, it was a 13-month program. So I started in June and I finished the end of June the next year. Fast forward from June to November, I'm working evenings and nights at UAMS, going to respiratory therapy school during the day, and I'm doing my clinical rotations at Children's Hospital, and the department director called me down on my last day to her office and said, I've been watching you. I know you applied for a job 5 months ago. I now have a job for you, and it'll be, and I told her the day that I applied 5 months earlier that I was going to come here when I graduated, and I was going to go to work on the helicopter team. Mm-hmm. Told her that. And so 5 months later, she offers me a job, not on the helicopter team, of course, because I'm still in school, but working Monday through Friday evenings, no weekends, no nights. And I was working every other weekend nights. And so I said, give me 2 weeks, put in my notice, started working there. In April, before I graduated, the end of June, the director of the helicopter team came to me and said, I want you on my team.
That's awesome.
And she started training me then. I graduated on June 30th, July the 4th. I was a full-fledged respiratory therapist on the helicopter team at Arkansas Children's Hospital. That vision of that destination 13 months down the road fueled me through the entirety of respiratory therapy school while working full-time during the evenings during the week, every other weekend nights, in order to get to that destination. And oh, by the way, once I got on the helicopter team, I met my wife, who was a flight nurse, and we've been married 35 years. And so crafting a compelling vision of the desired future 2 years, 3 years, no more than 5 years out is a key element of cultivating both grit and grace.
A couple more, and then we're done. I mean, this is awesome. Getting so much great pieces of wisdom. So that's me being unprofessional. I'm like, this is awesome. So next question for someone who is, I know I kind of
it can be awesome and you can still be professional.
yeah, exactly. That's true. That's so true. I was going to center this around maybe just business, but maybe I can expand a little bit. For someone who is leading a family, for someone who is leading in a business, or they're just leading a team right now, someone who's leading a nation right now, what are practical ways that they can develop grit without being hardened?
I think one way is to surround yourself with people and make it okay for them to give you feedback.
Right.
None of us is perfect. Even the person leading the biggest organization or the most successful country or the largest, fastest growing church or the biggest university, none of us is perfect. And so surrounding ourselves with people and giving them permission to give us feedback. Feedback is the breakfast of champions. And for someone who has grit, they leverage that feedback because they have the growth mindset and desire to get better. They focus on self-mastery to a great extent. And the only way to really pursue self-mastery is to have an unbiased view of how you are at this or that. And the only way to get that unbiased view is by getting multiple pieces of feedback from other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that's the single greatest thing I would suggest, regardless of where you are.
Right. You mentioned having lunch with Hunter Bees. That his dad had told me many years ago. Pastor Rick had said you're gonna have your fans, and then you're gonna have your biggest critics. And he's like, you're gonna have people who are just praising and just absolutely loving everything you're doing. There's gonna be people who are gonna be hating everything that you do. And so you got to find those people that are right in the middle, the right people to listen to, and listening to the right people. And
it's equally problematic to have a group of people who only tell you what you want to hear.
Right, exactly.
As it is to have a group of people who only tell you what you don't want to hear.
Exactly.
You need people who are going to tell you both. They're going to praise you when you need praise, and they're going to give you direct feedback when you need direct feedback. And we all need it at one time or another.
Right, because you would think, praise wouldn't harden somebody. I think it definitely could.
Does.
And he also said having 3 people who you could tell the biggest things to, and they're unfazed. They're like, okay, what's next? You know, those 3 or 4 people who are there who can help keep you from being
the ultimate hardening is to have a pride.
Right.
That means I don't need any additional development. And
right.
when you constantly get praise, and let's take a look at, and I'm probably going to say something that's going to offend some of those people out there that may hate what I do, but the world where everyone gets a participation trophy for participating does us no favors in terms of the development of grit and grace. It gives us this expectation that effort should be rewarded when effort many times fails.
Right.
And we need to be rewarded by certainly effort combined with results, but unchecked effort that produces no results is fruitless. We have to learn to change the level of effort or the direction of our effort or the focus of our effort in order to produce the results. Effort's a leading indicator. The lagging indicator are the results that we actually develop or deliver.
Yeah. All right, man. Last question. I wish it could go on forever, but this is the last question. If someone reads Grit and Grace and they apply it for the next 5 to 10 years, what do you believe changes most about their life or their leadership? More. I mean, even to piggyback on it, add a second part. You can answer both at the same time, one after the other. What kind of legacy does that leave for that leader?
They become known as a person who gets things done, but a person who brings people along with them in the process. They have a very broad network of people to whom they can go for feedback, people to whom they can go for support, but they also have a number of people who are coming to them because they need them and they need their insights, they need their perspectives, they need their opinions and what have you. Right. They're going to have people who unsolicited reach out to them to tell them of an impact that they've had on their lives when they weren't really aware of that impact. And so you begin to see, if you start thinking about the elements of grit and grace, you can kind of predict forward and you begin to see how that's going to come back in the form of feedback and what have you.
Right. Absolutely.
What is the first step towards being better at grit and the first step towards being better at grace?
Knowing where you are. Mm-hmm. You got to start by knowing where you are. If I don't know, I might think I'm more grit but not very good at grace, or I might think that I'm more grit. Is take the self-assessment. I know you're going to have a QR code out there where people can take the self-assessment. I encourage you to start there. Then read the book. Read the book, and there are dozens and dozens of longer and shorter case studies of some famous and not so famous people in kind of how they're known for either grit or grace or a combination, and look to see if you see yourself in some of those, or if you see the opposite of yourself in some of those. Having that growth mindset, which is a grit element, quite frankly, having that growth mindset is probably the single greatest thing that you can do after that. Take the assessment, read the book to see yourself or the absence of yourself in the various case studies and examples, and then commit to developing a growth mindset that I'm going to do whatever I have to do to become a better employee, a better leader, a better human, a better husband, a better father, what have you, better professional. And that requires me to be open to feedback and to be open to failure, and to understand that I have to pursue self-mastery with effort.
Yep.
Those were two of the quotes that I wrote down that I really liked. Was embrace setbacks and failures as learning experiences, and effort and practice are the primary paths to growth.
Very good.
And I love that.
Jeff, thank you so much for your wisdom and your perspective. Grit and Grace is more than just a leadership concept. It is a challenge on how we respond under pressure, how we treat people when things are hard, and what kind of legacy that we want to leave behind. So if today's conversation made you think, even if it's just a little, don't just move on. Grab a copy of Grit and Grace, scan the QR code that we keep mentioning, and see where you are naturally and where you naturally lean, and start the conversation with your family, with your spouse, with those that you lead, with other people that you lead beside in your business, or just in general, the people that you are around. So, and if you got value from this episode, subscribe to this podcast. Follow us on all of our socials on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And also go ahead and go to davecreekmedia.com/podcast, where you can look at all of our other podcast episodes and also get a free digital audit. I cannot emphasize free enough. So go get our free digital audit. We would love to do that for you guys. So Jeff, before we go, where can people connect with you and continue learning about the work that you do?
Yes, thanks, Tim. Appreciate you guys for having me here. Paul, you as well. Claire. LinkedIn, I'm very active on LinkedIn for my professional audience. People can also find me on Facebook and Instagram, but LinkedIn is where I'm most active. They can also find me at innovationjunkie.com or jeffs@innovationjunkie.com.
Awesome. That's all that we've got. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll see you guys on the next one.